The changes in technological developments that have created what we now think of as the World Wide Web, particularly Web 2.0 developments, YouTube, MySpace, Bebo, Facebook, all of the sites that provide user-generated content, dynamic content. Those developments, I think, radically change our understanding of the space, or imaginary space, that web represents. Early versions of the web, and in fact going back from before the internet was a reality, when it was just a conception, the sort of space wasn't like the space that Web 2.0 represents. I'm thinking of precursors in speculative science and in fiction. So, for example, Vannevar Bush in, I think it was 1946, something like that, he came up with this idea of the Memex machine, which is often cited as a precursor to the web. It was a sort of desktop facility involving microfiches and a read-write function in which any piece of data could be connected to any other piece of data, and that sort of connection of that multivalent set of connections between data will provide this tissue of information, tissue of knowledge, resulting in, or allowing for, the getting of wisdom somehow. So that's often cited as a precursor. Also, of course, William Gibson's notion of cyberspace, which I'll perhaps come on to, and also some of Borge's writing, particularly The Garden of Forking Paths, short story, which is quite overtly cited as a fictional account of a kind of reading in which the journey of the reader through the information, through the elements of data, is active and creates the final text. And outside of fiction, in literary theory, of course, Roland Barthes is very famous for his quotations, I think it's in Word to Text, in which he talks about the text by which we understand these days let's say the World Wide Web. He calls it a tissue of quotations drawn from the innumerable centres of culture. But he's writing prior to the construction of the web, but nevertheless we get this sense that this text, this weave, this tissue, connecting all those things together. And William Gibson, I won't go into William Gibson, I think I spoke about him elsewhere. But in all of those precursors to the web, the space that's being imagined there, I would think, or it sounds to me at least, as kind of Cartesian or Newtonian space. There's no I in there. There's no first-person perspective. There's no perspective at all. That concept of a place to stand from which vanishing points can be constructed and horizons can develop and all those kind of things. Those are all absent in the formulation of space conceived by the Memex and in the Garden of Forking Paths, and elsewhere also, and in literary theory. Although Barthes foretold the death of the author in that writing, in which that single line through a narrative which Barthes attributes to the author God, that's missing. But I would suggest there's also a kind of absence of a reader, or at least a readership position. There's just a sort of dissemination in which one is distributed across the text pretty endlessly, really, and in many ways I would suggest pointlessly. So that space which I think actually mirrors other metaphorical spaces. I think when we read about design space, for example, which is one of the key metaphors in design, but in you see it in biology, for example. I think Richard Dawkins makes reference to design space in one of his books when he's talking about the possible evolutionary forms which can develop. You can see there's already kind of imagining, as already existing in some hypothetical design space, and the evolutionary process, driven and steered by the conditions of the environment, moving the genome, or moving the phenotype through this design space. But again, this design space has no centre, there's no point to it. It's ultimately Cartesian, it's grid-like, Newtonian. And I think you also find that in that kind of space also exists as the space that we sometimes talk about. We talk about problem solving. Problem solving is often spoken of in the literature about problem solving as movement within that problem space, navigating that problem space towards some solution which pre-exists, if you like, which sort of pre-exists, maybe pre-exists the setting of the problem, or is possibly determined by the terms of the problem. But either way, the solution to the problem kind of exists prior to the movement towards it, or prior to its discovery. And it is an act of discovery, moving through a pre-existing terrain of possible solutions until one finds the right one. And that space, again, is Cartesian. So that's a long way of saying, I guess, there's some analogues between our conceptualization of space, which is Cartesian and Newtonian, a similar understanding of space that one finds in the concept of design space and problem-solving space, and one also finds an analogue in the space of the World Wide Web, or the early World Wide Web, Web 1.0, which is a kind of endless series of computers linked together, as presciently suggested by Vannevar Bush in the concept of the memex, and latterly by Al Gore, actually, in the development of the World Wide Web itself. Al Gore famously, or possibly infamously, referred to it as the information superhighway. And information superhighways contain landmarks, and those landmarks, like real highways, contain landmarks. They contain starting points and ending points, just like real highways, and a space in which the superhighway crosses, like a real highway, is kind of Cartesian, like design space and like problem space. The place you go into pre-exists your journey, and the land that you move through is static and pre-exists your moving through it.